the Harvard professor who gave his students LSD. In 1960, Dr. Timothy Leary was a respected clinical psychologist with a promising career at Harvard. He wore tweed jackets, his hair was short, and his first book on personality was so well regarded that the Annual Review of Psychology called it the most important book on psychotherapy of the year. He was, by all accounts, a rising star. Just a few years later, President Richard Nixon would call him the most dangerous man in America. This is the story of how a single mushroom trip in Mexico sparked a rebellion, got a professor fired from one of the world's most famous universities, and launched a psychedelic revolution that would change science and America forever. Section 1. The respected academic. Before he became the high priest of LSD, Timothy Leary was the picture of academic success. He was a lecturer in clinical psychology at Harvard, part of the university's Center for Research in Personality. Having earned his PhD from Berkeley, he'd already written a highly praised book on personality diagnostics and was seen by his colleagues as a brilliant, if slightly unconventional, thinker. He was building a solid, respectable career inside the ivy-covered walls of a world-renowned institution. Leary and his colleague, Dr. Richard Alpert, were two bright young psychologists exploring the frontiers of the human mind. They figured that psychology, as the study of the mind, had a legitimate scientific interest in how our cognition and perception were affected by chemical substances. At this point, neither had any idea their academic curiosity was about to collide with a force that would derail their careers and set them on a path toward history. The catalyst wasn't found in a sterile lab or a university library, but on a trip to Cuernavaca, Mexico, in the summer of 1960. Section 2. The discovery. It was in Mexico that Leary first tried psilocybin mushrooms, the so-called magic mushrooms. The experience wasn't just profound, it was shattering. He described it as more educational than all of his years studying at Harvard. It was a revelation that convinced him that Western psychology was missing a crucial key to understanding consciousness. He returned to Harvard a changed man, certain that these substances held the potential to revolutionize therapy. He brought his newfound passion to his colleague Richard Alpert, and in 1960, they founded the Harvard Psilocybin Project. Their mission was to scientifically document the effects of psilocybin on human consciousness. At the time, both psilocybin and the more powerful substance, LSD, were legal in the United States. Leary and Alpert believed they were on the cusp of a major scientific breakthrough. They secured a supply of synthesized psilocybin from Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, the same Swiss company where a chemist named Albert Hofmann had first synthesized LSD and prepared to launch their experiments. What began as a respectable scientific inquiry, however, was about to become something far more controversial. Section 3. The Harvard Psilocybin Project. The project kicked off with two major experiments that, on the surface, looked like legitimate, if boundary-pushing, research. First was the Concord Prison Experiment, which ran from 1961 to 1963. The idea was to see if psilocybin-assisted group psychotherapy could lower the rate of recidivism among inmates. 32 prisoners were given psilocybin in a therapeutic setting, with Leary and his team hoping the experience could create a conversion moment that would help them break free from criminal thinking. In a move that would later draw heavy criticism, the researchers often took the drug with the prisoners to build trust. Leary's initial results were sensational, claiming the recidivism rate for his subjects had dropped dramatically. The second key study was the Marsh Chapel experiment in April 1962, also known as the Good Friday experiment. This was designed to test if psilocybin could reliably trigger a genuine mystical experience. 20 theology graduate students gathered in the basement of Boston University's Marsh Chapel. In a double-blind study, half got psilocybin and the other half got niacin, a placebo that causes a noticeable physical flushing. The results were astounding. The vast majority of participants who received psilocybin reported having a profound mystical experience. A follow-up study 25 years later found that many participants still considered it one of the highest points of their spiritual lives. On paper, these studies seem to prove Leary's theory. But behind the promising data, the line between research and rebellion was starting to get very blurry. Section 4. The blurring lines and controversy. The problem with the Harvard psilocybin project wasn't just the drugs, it was the methods. Leary's approach was starting to feel less like science and more like a crusade. He and Alpert weren't just researchers, they were participants, taking drugs with their subjects in a radical break from objective protocol that horrified many of their colleagues. Allegations started to fly. The Harvard Crimson accused Leary and Alpert of promoting recreational drug use. Whispers of psilocybin parties and concerns over pressuring students grew louder. The most serious issue arose when the university discovered that Leary and Alpert had given psychedelics to undergraduate students, breaking a direct agreement. The administration was getting nervous. After reports of students having adverse reactions and needing hospitalization, the university tried to rein in the project. But the conflict only deepened. The project was becoming a liability. Leary and Alpert, once seen as brilliant academics, were now viewed as rogue operators more interested in a movement than in rigorous science. Harvard, an institution built on tradition, had a decision to make. Section 5. The expulsion and rebellion. In the spring of 1963, the hammer finally fell. Harvard decided to make a public example of its psychedelic researchers. First, Richard Alpert was fired. The official reason was that he had given psilocybin to an undergraduate off-campus, a direct violation of university policy. Alpert admitted it, but argued it was a private matter. The university disagreed. Shortly after, in May 1963, Timothy Leary was also let go. Officially, Harvard stated he had failed to show up for his teaching duties, a charge Leary himself called a phony rap. But to anyone watching, the real reason was obvious. The Harvard drug scandal was public, and the university was cutting ties with its two most controversial figures. It's worth noting that Leary was a lecturer, not a tenured professor, which made his dismissal procedurally easier. Their expulsion from academia was a watershed moment. It discredited them among scientists, but, paradoxically, made them heroes to the growing counterculture. Banished from the ivory tower, Leary and Alpert were now free to take their message to the people. Section 6. The High Priest Era. Freed from academic life, Timothy Leary leaned into his new role as a psychedelic guru. He became the public face of LSD, a charismatic figure who championed psychedelics for personal enlightenment. He came up with a new mantra that would define an era. Turn on, tune in, drop out. The phrase became a rallying cry. Turn on meant using psychedelics to access higher consciousness. Tune in meant living harmoniously with the world around you. And drop out was the most controversial part. A call to detach from involuntary commitments, question authority, and think for yourself. Leary's advocacy made him a cultural icon, but also a public enemy. As stories of bad trips spread, the establishment pushed back. Leary found himself in a constant battle with law enforcement and was arrested dozens of times. The government saw him not as a visionary, but as a threat. This culminated in President Richard Nixon famously branding him the most dangerous man in America, cementing Leary's outlaw status. Legacy. The story of Timothy Leary is complex. Was he a reckless charlatan who derailed legitimate science? Or a brave visionary who sacrificed his career to try and open humanity's mind? Let us know what you think in the comments. His legacy is as polarized as his life. His questionable methodology, like the flawed data analysis in the Concord prison study, which was later debunked, did psychedelic research no favors. For decades, research into these substances was driven underground, stifled by legal and political crackdowns, like the 1970 Controlled Substances Act, which was fueled in part by the cultural backlash Leary helped create. Yet today, we're in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance. Prestigious institutions, including a new center affiliated with Harvard, are picking up the threads Leary left behind. Modern studies are now investigating what Leary first hypothesized, that these compounds show significant promise for treating conditions like depression, PTSD, and addiction. Timothy Leary forced a conversation about consciousness. He blurred the lines between scientist, subject, and spiritual seeker, and he paid a heavy price. But in doing so, he cracked open a door that, after half a century, science is finally daring to walk through again. His work leaves us with a final question. In the quest to understand the human mind, where does the boundary between courageous exploration and dangerous rebellion truly lie?